Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just like absolute precision.
Right. It's very clinical, very exact.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like engineering or something. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, well, there it is.
There is the fracture. It is entirely binary.
Totally binary. Broken or not broken. And frankly, I think that's comforting.
Oh, absolutely. We like things to be visible. We like our problems to be categorized and placed in a neat little box so we know exactly how to fix them.
Right. But then you step away from the physical body and you step into the world of human emotion.
Which is incredibly messy.
So messy. You step into the realm of memory, of legacy, and specifically of just profound loss. And suddenly that x-ray machine is entirely useless.
It doesn't apply at all. You're looking at an emotional landscape that is just incredibly murky.
Murky, unpredictable, and entirely unique to every single human being. And historically, I think because we didn't quite know what to do with that messiness, we tried to force it into these very rigid, formal boxes.
Which makes perfect sense from like an anthropological standpoint, if you think about it.
Really? How so?
Well, when human beings are faced with something as vast and incomprehensible as mortality, we historically just cling to structure. We build frameworks to contain the chaos.
To contain the chaos. I like that. And one of the most universal frameworks we've built, something almost everyone listening to this has interacted with at least once in their life, is a very specific physical document.
It's like the funeral program.
Exactly. So I want you, the listener, to just visualize this scene with me for a second.
Yeah.
Picture yourself attending a memorial service.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You are walking up the steps, you pull open the heavy wooden doors of a traditional church, or, maybe you're walking through the sleek glass doors of a modern memorial hall.
Right. Either way, there's a specific atmosphere.
Yeah, you step inside, and there's that unmistakable, heavy, hushed silence in the air. People are speaking in whispers.
You can almost feel the tension in the room.
And someone standing right by the entrance, usually an usher in a dark suit, hands you a piece of paper.
And without even having to describe it, I think every single person listening knows exactly what that piece of paper feels like in their hands.
It is almost universally identical. I mean, think about it. It is usually a single sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper, folded directly down the middle.
To create a little 4-page booklet, right?
Exactly. Printed on a stiff, somewhat formal cardstock, maybe a pale ivory or just a stark white.
Very standardized.
Very. And when you sit down in your pew or your folding chair and you open that booklet up, what do you actually see? I mean, for all intents and purposes, it is strictly an itinerary.
It really is. It's a schedule of operations.
Right. It is a functional, logistical document. It tells you that the opening prayer is happening at 10:05 a.m.
It tells you the name of the cousin who is reading the eulogy.
It tells you to turn to page 42 in the hymnal to sing a specific song. And, it gives you the address of the reception hall where the sandwiches are being served afterwards.
It is an entirely utilitarian object.
It is.
But, to be fair to history, it kind of needed to be. For generations, that document provided a rigid structure to an event that is inherently unstructured on an emotional level.
That makes sense. When people are fundamentally at a loss for words, an itinerary gives them a script to follow.
Exactly. It tells them where to stand, when to sit, when to speak. It acts as a guardrail over a very steep emotional cliff.
A guardrail. That's a great way to put it. It is a script. But what we're going to explore today, and I find this absolutely fascinating from a psychological standpoint, is how that centuries-old script is currently being completely rewritten.
It's a massive shift.
It really is. So welcome to our deep dive, and I want to take a second to extend a very special welcome to the Funeral Channel Network audience joining us today for this specific exploration.
Yes, welcome everyone. We're glad you're here.
Our mission today is to look at a highly focused, deeply compelling body of research that our listener sent in.
It's based on excerpts from an essay titled Funeral Program, Essay 8.pdf.
Right. And it details this massive seismic shift in how families are designing and utilizing these funeral programs today. We are looking at a complete evolution of that folded piece of paper.
And, while it might seem at a superficial glance that we are just talking about shifting aesthetic preferences,
like swapping out one font for another.
Right, or moving from ink on paper to pixels on a screen. But what this research actually reveals is a profound evolution in how we process grief as a society.
Wow.
It reveals how we construct memory and how we connect with one another in the modern era. Because design is never just about making things look pretty.
It's not.
No, design is a mirror. It reflects our shifting sociological structures and our deepest cultural values.
Okay, let's unpack this. The goal of this deep dive is to thoroughly explore how three very specific forces, design, technology, and personalization, are completely transforming the way we honor our loved ones.
And we really need to look at why understanding the psychology behind these trends matters for you, the listener.
Exactly. Because whether you are attending a service this weekend or whether you are ever in the deeply difficult, overwhelming position of being tasked with planning a tribute for someone you love, this evolution changes the entire landscape.
It's so important to note that this isn't a morbid topic. We aren't here to be grim.
Not at all. This is a beautiful, vital exploration of human connection.
I think establishing that tone is just critical. We live in a culture that generally prefers to sanitize or completely look away from end-of-life realities.
It makes people super uncomfortable.
It does. But the data we are reviewing today is ultimately about love.
Yeah, it really is.
It is about how human beings are utilizing modern tools to say, hey, this person mattered, and I want to ensure their story is told accurately.
So when we view funeral programs through the lens of visual storytelling and psychological caregiving, it stops being a morbid administrative task.
Right, it becomes an act of profound devotion.
So let's start broad. Before we can really look at the mechanics of what these new modern designs actually look like, we need to understand the fundamental shift in why the designs are changing in the first place.
The underlying motivation.
Exactly. The core argument being made in our source material right at the top is that funeral programs have evolved significantly in recent years. We are moving rapidly away from the rigid utilitarian layouts we just visualized.
And the text specifically attributes this evolution to a collision of three specific driving forces.
Right. Those forces being broader trends in modern design, the democratization of technology, and a deep societal craving for personalization.
It is a fascinating triad. Let's look at the historical context to understand why those three forces are so disruptive right now.
Let's do it.
The traditional layout that we all know, that rigid, standardized itinerary, it wasn't necessarily born out of a lack of creativity.
What was it born out of then?
It was born out of limitation, specifically technological and economic limitation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, if we go back 50, 60, or 100 years, creating printed materials was an expensive, slow, and highly specialized process. You couldn't just print something from your phone.
Right, you had to actually go to a local print shop or maybe the church office.
Exactly. You went to a local printer. They possessed the physical typesetting equipment. And because a funeral usually happens within a matter of days after a death, there was just no time to commission custom graphic design.
That makes total sense. They were on a massive time crunch.
So the printer had a few preset physical templates. These templates were largely dictated by local religious or cultural institutions.
Like having a standardized border, maybe a stock illustration, a dove or a cross.
Precisely. And you simply filled in the blanks. Name here, date of birth here, date of death here, order of service here.
Wow, it really was literal mass production applied to individual grief.
It was standardized because standardization was the only physically efficient way to produce a document on a 48-hour timeline.
And what our research implies is that this traditional layout, while logistically necessary for its time, was inherently less visually engaging and significantly less meaningful.
Because it was a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. It was applying an institutional template to a human life that was entirely beautifully unique.
But now we are looking at a society where those technological limitations have just evaporated.
Totally. High-quality, complex design architecture is no longer the exclusive, expensive domain of professional printing houses. I mean, it sits right on the laptops and smartphones in our living rooms.
And that technological shift allows for modern design sensibilities to enter the memorial space, which are being entirely driven by that third force, personalization.
I really want to talk about that craving for personalization, because it feels incredibly similar to a shift we've seen in another major life event.
Oh, which one?
Think about weddings. If you look back to the 1950s or 1960s, weddings were largely rigid, nearly identical institutional ceremonies.
That's a really good point. They were very formulaic.
Yeah, you wore a specific type of white dress. You said the exact same institutional vows. The reception was in a church basement, and you served the exact same finger sandwiches as the couple who got married the week before.
It was a standardized script dictated by the institution.
But look at weddings today. Over the last few decades, they have shifted dramatically into these highly personalized, hyper-customized events.
People have signature cocktails now.
Exactly. Custom curated Spotify playlists, vows they wrote from scratch, and they get married on mountaintops or in art museums.
Yeah.
Funerals are doing the exact same thing.
You think so?
Yeah, we're watching the shift from a standard institutional script to a personalized, hyper-specific reflection of the individual.
I think we need to pause and examine that analogy because while it's a strong parallel, there is a crucial nuance we have to acknowledge about the psychology of grief versus the psychology of celebration.
Okay, challenge me on it. What's the difference?
Well, with a wedding, the shift toward hyper-personalization is driven by a desire for self-expression. The couple is saying, look at who we are. They have months, often years, to plan it.
They have the cognitive bandwidth to obsess over the color of the napkins.
Exactly. But with a funeral, the shift toward personalization is not just about expression. It's about psychological anchor points.
Anchor points.
Yes. Historically, the comfort of the traditional institutional funeral actually came from its sameness.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
When a family is shattered by sudden loss, having an institution step in and say, do not worry, we have a script, you will sing this song, you will read this prayer, and then we will bury the dead. That predictability was a massive buffer against the sheer chaos of grief.
That makes total sense. When you are in shock, you don't want to be asked to invent a ritual from scratch. You want someone to hand you a map.
Precisely. So the question becomes, if the old institutional script provided a safety net, why is our source material showing such a massive shift away from it?
Why are families taking on the burden of personalizing these services and these programs themselves?
Because, as the data indicates, the nature of what provides comfort has fundamentally changed. Today, comfort no longer comes from the generic structure.
Where does it come from then?
The comfort comes from the specific, authentic representation of the person who died. In sociology, we view this as a shift from finding solace in the collective to finding solace in the individual.
We want to see their specific face, read their specific favorite quotes, and remember their specific quirks.
Exactly. We are willing to trade the easy comfort of the institutional script for the deeper, more resonant comfort of authentic representation.
And that desire for authentic representation brings up a really specific phrase from the research that I want us to spend a significant amount of time on. Because when I first read it, it felt like a total paradox.
Which phrase is that?
The material notes that by utilizing modern trends, families can create a funeral program that feels, quote, both contemporary and timeless.
Ah, yes. It is a brilliant observation by the authors of the research, and you are right to call it a paradox. What's fascinating here is there is an inherent, almost aggressive tension between those two words.
Yes, contemporary and timeless.
Yeah.
They are, by definition, essentially opposites.
They really are.
Right. If something is contemporary, it means it is of the moment. It means it belongs to the now. It is tethered to the present day, reflecting the current cultural zeitgeist.
And if something is timeless, it means it exists entirely outside the constraints of time.
Exactly. It belongs to any era or no era at all. It endures forever without aging. So how on earth does a single piece of paper, a single memorial document, manage to occupy both of those spaces simultaneously?
It is the ultimate tightrope walk in design theory. To understand how it works, we really have to deeply analyze what those words actually mean in the context of human visual consumption.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's look at the first half of the paradox. When the research indicates that families want something contemporary, it means they are demanding a document that speaks the visual language of the world they currently inhabit.
So matching their everyday visual expectations.
Right. Think about the baseline of our daily visual experience today. We consume information through beautifully designed smartphone apps, through meticulously curated social media feeds, and sleek, intuitive digital interfaces.
Even the menu at a local coffee shop is likely designed with sophisticated typography and negative space.
Exactly. Our visual standards as a society are incredibly high. So when a modern person walks into a memorial service to honor someone they deeply loved, and they are handed a poorly photocopied, cluttered pamphlet with pixelated clip art and outdated fonts.
It feels jarring. Subconsciously, it feels kind of disrespectful.
It does. It feels like the importance of the person's life is not being matched by the quality of the tribute.
The contemporary aspect is about utilizing modern design standards to ensure the document feels relevant, dignified, and engaging today. It must meet the visual expectations of the modern mourner.
Absolutely.
Okay, I follow that. The contemporary aspect is the format. It's the high-quality visual language. It's the fact that it doesn't look like it was printed on a dot matrix printer in a back office in 1985.
Right, exactly.
But where does the timeless part come in? Because this is where I get tripped up. If something is too contemporary, if it leans too hard into whatever design trend is hot on Instagram right now, it's going to look ridiculous in 10 years.
That is a very real danger.
We've all looked at wedding photos or family portraits from the 1970s and laughed at the massive lapels, the orange pattern wallpaper, and the groovy fonts.
Oh, definitely.
You absolutely do not want a memorial document to feel like a fleeting fad. You don't want someone to pull this out of a memory box in 2040 and cringe at the aesthetic.
And that is the exact danger of confusing contemporary with trendy. They are not the same thing at all.
How so?
The research specifically contrasts these new, evolved designs with the limitations of traditional layouts, noting that the ultimate goal is to honor loved ones in a deeply meaningful way. Timelessness in design is never achieved by clinging to old, outdated traditions.
But it's also not achieved by chasing the newest fad.
Exactly. Timelessness is achieved by stripping away the superfluous.
Give me a real-world example of that outside of a funeral program.
Okay, think of a classic, perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Or think of a simple, unadorned gold wedding band. Or a sleek, mid-century modern chair.
Okay, I can picture those.
Those items are contemporary. You could place them in a room today and they would look perfectly modern and sophisticated. But they are also timeless. They looked good 50 years ago, and they will look good 50 years from now.
Why is that exactly?
Because they don't rely on loud, temporary embellishments. They rely on fundamental, enduring mathematical principles of balance, proportion, and geometry.
Wow, so applying that to the program.
Right. In the context of a funeral program, making it timeless means designing it in a way that centers the core, unchangeable truth of the document, which is the person's life.
If the design acts merely as a quiet, elegant, perfectly balanced vessel for their memory, it will never look dated, because the memories themselves do not age.
Precisely. The memories do not age.
The memories don't age. That is a really powerful way to frame it. I want to ask you, the listener, to just pause whatever you're doing for a second and reflect.
It's worth thinking about.
Think back to the most meaningful tributes, funerals, or celebrations of life you have ever attended. Really put yourself back in that room. What was the thing that actually moved you?
What actually brought the lump to your throat?
Exactly. Was it the formal, rigid structure of the event? Was it the fact that the program followed a strict historical layout with a Gothic font?
Probably not.
No. Or was it the personal, specific touches? Was it hearing a highly specific, funny story about the deceased? Was it seeing a certain photograph of them laughing, or holding a keepsake that felt like it truly captured their distinct essence?
I would wager my life savings that it is always the latter.
Always. The personalization is where the emotional resonance actually lives.
And that deep emotional resonance is exactly what the modern templates described in our research are trying to facilitate.
The source material emphasizes that these programs are no longer limited. They are evolving to incorporate innovative elements that enhance not just the visual appeal, but the experience and the keepsake value.
I want to linger on that word, experience. The document is no longer just a schedule to be quickly glanced at and discarded.
It's becoming an active participant in the psychological experience of grieving. It sets an emotional tone for the entire gathering.
It really does.
So let's use that to transition from the desire for that meaningful experience to the actual mechanics of how it is happening in the real world.
From the why to the how.
Exactly. We've talked extensively about the why, the deep psychological desire for personalization, the shift away from rigid institutional tradition, the tension between the contemporary and the timeless. Now, I want to dive into the how.
Let's look at the tools.
Specifically, I want to look at how technology is breaking down historical barriers. Our source research identifies its very first major tangible trend right out of the gate.
The digital shift.
Yes. It states that one of the most notable trends we are seeing is the rapid rise of digital funeral programs. These formats allow families to share programs electronically, making them accessible to those who absolutely cannot attend the service in person.
This is a monumental shift. And again, to a casual observer, it sounds like a very simple, almost boring logistical update. Like, oh, we're emailing a link instead of handing out a piece of cardstock. Big deal.
Right, it sounds mundane at first.
But if we pull back and look at the sociology of this, the digital shift fundamentally alters the geographical boundaries of the memorialization ritual itself.
It totally shatters them. Think about what a physical piece of paper demands of a human being. It demands physical, geographic proximity.
Yes. For thousands of years of human history, the ritual of mourning was intensely localized.
You mourned with the people in your immediate village, your town, your specific community.
Right. If someone passed away, the physical program, the physical gathering, was a token exclusive to the people who could physically walk through those church doors at that specific hour on that specific Tuesday.
If you weren't there, you missed it.
And the reality of our modern sociological structure simply does not support that localized model anymore.
We do not live in small, geographically confined villages anymore.
Not at all. We live in a highly mobile, incredibly spread out, globalized society. Families are scattered across continents.
Children move away for college and end up building lives in different time zones.
Mm-hmm.
Careers pull siblings to opposite hemispheres. Friendships are maintained digitally across thousands of miles.
Exactly. So when a sudden death occurs, and it is almost always sudden, even when it's expected, the historical expectation that everyone who loved that person can immediately drop everything.
Pause their lives, purchase exorbitant last-minute flights, secure hotel rooms, arrange childcare, and physically congregate in a single room. It's just becoming increasingly unrealistic.
It is a massive financial and logistical burden piled directly on top of an acute emotional crisis.
It really is. And we have to ask ourselves, what happened historically to the people who could not overcome those logistical hurdles?
That's the painful part. What happens to the sister who is too sick to travel?
Or the grandson who is deployed overseas, or the lifelong friend who simply cannot afford a $1,000 plane ticket.
Historically, they experienced a profound sense of disenfranchised grief.
Disenfranchised grief. Okay, explain what that means in this specific context.
Disenfranchised grief is a term used to describe grief that is not fully recognized or socially validated by the community.
Oh, wow.
When you cannot attend the physical ritual of the funeral, you are basically cut off from the communal mechanism of saying goodbye. You don't hear the eulogy, you don't see the photos, you don't hold the program.
You are left alone in your living room, thousands of miles away, isolated in your mourning, while everyone else gets to process the loss together.
It is deeply traumatizing. By highlighting the rise of digital funeral programs that make the tribute accessible globally, the research is describing a technological cure for that isolation.
It is describing the democratization of grief. It is making the ritual borderless.
It's an incredible development.
That is incredible. It accommodates the modern diaspora. You could have a physical service happening in a small, quiet chapel in Ohio.
Right.
But the program, this beautifully designed, highly personalized, contemporary digital document, is simultaneously being viewed by a grandchild sitting in an apartment in Tokyo.
And an old college roommate riding a train in London.
Yes. And a former colleague sitting at a desk in Brazil. They are all, in a digital sense, turning the pages together.
They are all reading the same stories, looking at the same beautiful timeline of photos, and experiencing the exact same visual tribute at the exact same time.
It creates a synchronized, global moment of reflection.
It creates a new kind of congregation, one that isn't defined by the physical walls of a building, but by the shared emotional connection to the deceased, facilitated by a digital network.
It's a fascinating, beautiful evolution of the human gathering.
It really is.
Okay, I hear you. And I completely agree with the beauty of that global congregation. But I have to push back here.
Oh, okay. It's here.
I have to challenge this digital utopia a little bit. Because as much as I love the idea of global accessibility, the research also specifically and repeatedly mentions the keepsake value of these programs.
It does, yes.
And I have to wonder, if we make everything digital, if we just email a web link or text a PDF file to everyone, don't we lose something profoundly tangible?
You're talking about the physical aspect.
Yeah, doesn't holding a physical piece of paper actually matter to the human grieving process? We live our entire lives staring at screens. An email feels inherently ephemeral. You read it, you swipe left, and it has gone into the trash bin.
That's a fair point.
A physical program is something tactile. You can trace the letters with your thumb, you can tuck it into a family Bible, or put it in a wooden memory box. Doesn't the digital trend threaten that deep, primal human need for a physical artifact?
That is a very valid critique, and it raises a crucial philosophical question about how we actually define a keepsake in the 21st century.
Okay, how do we define it then?
It is absolutely true that tactile sensations carry immense emotional weight. The smell of old paper, the texture of heavy cardstock, the physical weight of a booklet, those are powerful sensory triggers that the human brain uses to encode memory.
Exactly.
I'm not discounting the value of print. In fact, many families use these modern platforms to generate digital files that they do print locally on high-quality paper.
Right, a hybrid approach.
But we also have to look at the harsh reality of physical keepsakes.
Which is what? That they take up space.
That they are fundamentally fragile, and they are often lost. Let's be honest about the life cycle of a physical funeral program. A grieving relative takes it home. They don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, they don't want to throw it away because that feels like a betrayal.
So they tuck it into a book on a shelf. 20 years later, they downsize, that book gets donated to a thrift store, and the program is gone.
Oh, that's sad, but true.
Or they put it in a cardboard box in the attic. The attic gets a leak, the paper is ruined by water damage, paper degrades, it fades in the sunlight, it burns in house fires.
So a physical program is entirely susceptible to the chaotic physical environment.
Exactly. A digital program, however, fundamentally redefines the concept of permanence.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is a wild thought.
Yeah.
You are arguing that the digital version, a string of code sitting on a server, is actually more permanent than the physical cardstock.
In many sociological and practical ways, yes. A high-resolution digital file can be backed up in the cloud across multiple servers. It can be duplicated infinitely without any loss of quality.
You can send it to 50 relatives with one click.
It can be retrieved instantly, decades later, with a simple search on a smartphone. It isn't a lesser keepsake just because you can't touch it. It is a remarkably resilient, virtually indestructible keepsake.
And it doesn't require physical storage space, which means it is never subject to that ruthless emotional purging we all have to do when we move houses or clear out an estate.
Right. It just remains safely archived in our digital ecosystem.
That makes a lot of sense.
Furthermore, a digital format can be dynamic. While a printed program is frozen in time the second the ink dries, a family might choose to update a digital memorial space.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
But even sticking strictly to the static digital document, its accessibility is its greatest strength as a keepsake. It validates connection.
I want the listener to think about a time they couldn't travel for an important life event. A wedding, a graduation, or sadly a funeral. Do you remember that hollow, disconnected feeling?
It's an awful feeling.
That feeling of life moving on without you. Now think about how digital access, even something as simple as receiving the official, beautifully designed digital program in your inbox, seeing the curated photos, reading the eulogies on your screen while the event was happening, how that helped bridge that emotional gap.
It's powerful.
It doesn't replace the feeling of physically hugging a grieving relative, but it validates your connection to the event. It says, you are seen. You are still part of this community. Your mourning matters.
Yeah, that is the true power of the digital shift. It is not just about the convenience of avoiding a printer. It is about profound emotional inclusion.
And that inclusion, that desire to care for the emotional state of the mourner, leads us directly into exactly how these documents, whether they are printed out physically on heavy paper or shared dynamically across the globe via digital links, are actually being designed.
Because the visual language they use is not random.
Not at all. It is deeply intentional and deeply rooted in psychology. The source material highlights a second major growing trend right alongside the digital shift.
The shift toward minimalism.
Yes. It states, and I quote, "Another growing trend is minimalist design, clean layouts, soft color palettes, and simple typography that emphasize clarity and elegance."
Okay, I find this part of the research absolutely fascinating.
Me too. Because minimalism is everywhere right now. It is the dominant aesthetic of our current cultural era.
You see it in the user interfaces of our smartphones.
You see it in high-end modern architecture. You see it in the stark, clean lines of interior design. You even see it in fashion.
But applying the concept of modern minimalism to a funeral program, that feels like a very specific, very deliberate psychological choice.
It is an intensely psychological choice.
As someone who studies human behavior and visual design, I find the specific vocabulary the research uses here to be incredibly rich. Clean layouts, soft color palettes, simple typography.
We could honestly spend hours just unpacking the neurology behind those three phrases alone.
We really could.
Let's do it. Let's unpack the mechanics of this. Why do those three specific design choices, clean, soft, simple, matter so much when someone is in the throes of mourning?
Why is minimalism the chosen vehicle for modern grief?
Exactly.
To understand why minimalism works, we first have to understand the cognitive load of grief. We really have to look at the brain.
Okay, what's happening in the brain?
When a family is planning a funeral and when guests are attending one, they are not operating under normal conditions. They are operating under extreme psychological and physiological duress.
Grief is a heavy burden.
It is. Grief is not just a profound emotional sadness. It is a neurologically taxing state. It is almost like a temporary traumatic brain injury.
Wow. Wait, really? Explain that.
When you experience acute loss, the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that processes fear and emotion, just goes into overdrive. Your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline.
So you're basically in fight or flight mode.
Yes. The brain is overwhelmed because it is trying to process a massive, permanent, devastating alteration to its reality. The person who was there yesterday is not there today, and the brain has to rewire itself to understand that.
That sounds exhausting.
In that heightened state of stress, normal cognitive function is severely impaired. Executive functioning drops. People report feeling foggy, they are unable to concentrate, they forget simple words.
And crucially, they become easily, painfully overwhelmed by sensory input. The world suddenly feels too loud, the lights feel too bright, and everything feels too fast.
Exactly. So if we take that grieving, overwhelmed, foggy brain and we hand it a traditional, highly ornate, old-school funeral program.
Maybe something with heavy, Gothic, Old English fonts.
Right. Dense, clustered blocks of text, dark, brooding colors, and complex, intertwining borders. What happens? Does their brain actually struggle to process it?
Absolutely. It struggles significantly.
In cognitive psychology, we talk about cognitive load theory, developed by John Sweller. It basically states that our working memory has a limited capacity.
Visual clutter acts as an aggressive stressor.
It really does. It demands cognitive energy to parse and navigate. A complicated, cluttered layout asks the grieving brain to do work it simply doesn't have the energy to do.
The brain has to ask, where am I supposed to look first? What does this curly, cursive font even say?
Why are there so many contrasting elements? What is the hierarchy of information here? A grieving brain does not have the spare energy to solve a visual puzzle.
It's exhausting.
It is visually exhausting, and that is exactly why the research emphasizes a clean layout as a primary trend. A clean layout offers visual breathing room.
It utilizes negative space, what graphic designers call white space, to guide the eye gently and intuitively.
It doesn't shout at the viewer, it whispers. It requires zero cognitive effort to navigate.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. I want to use an analogy here. It feels like the difference between walking into a highly cluttered, floor-to-ceiling antique shop versus walking into a pristine modern art gallery.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
If you walk into an antique shop where every square inch is covered in lamps, rugs, paintings, and trinkets, your eyes dart everywhere. You are overwhelmed by the sheer crushing volume of objects.
Your brain is hyperstimulated.
You actually can't focus on any one beautiful thing because everything is demanding your attention simultaneously. It's chaotic.
But if you walk into a minimalist modern art gallery, the space is vast and quiet.
There might be one single, beautiful, striking painting hanging on a massive blank white wall.
And what is the psychological function of that massive white wall? What does the emptiness actually do?
The emptiness forces you to focus entirely on the subject. The white space isn't just empty space. It is highly functional.
It serves to elevate the art.
It says, look only at this. In the context of a funeral program, a clean, minimalist layout uses that white space to force the viewer to focus entirely on the person who has passed away.
The design gets out of the way. It stops competing for attention.
It creates a sanctuary for the memory.
That is a phenomenal way to articulate it. The design gets out of the way. It creates a visual sanctuary. And the research pairs these clean layouts with soft color palettes.
This again ties directly back to the physiological response of the nervous system to visual stimuli.
We have to remember that for centuries, the dominant color of mourning in Western society was stark black. Think of the Victorian era.
Heavy black crepe, black clothing, black borders on stationery. It was incredibly heavy and oppressive.
It was designed to signify solemnity. But physiologically, stark black or any harsh, highly saturated color like neon tones or aggressively bright primary reds and yellows stimulates the nervous system.
They can elevate the heart rate. They are alarming colors.
Soft color palettes, however, the muted tones mentioned in modern trends like gentle sage greens, warm creams, pale blushes, soft slate blues, they have the exact opposite physiological effect.
They engage the parasympathetic nervous system. They soothe the senses.
Think of the colors of a quiet landscape at dawn. They create an environment of calm and tranquility, which is exactly what the nervous system is desperately craving during a period of acute, shocking loss.
And then we have the third element, simple typography. I honestly think people massively underestimate how much fonts matter to our emotional state.
They matter tremendously.
We are so historically accustomed to seeing those deeply traditional, heavy fonts associated with mourning. The ornate calligraphy-style scripts that look like they were chiseled onto a medieval tombstone.
Those traditional scripts carry a lot of historical gravitas, certainly. They signal to the viewer, this is a serious, formal, institutional occasion.
However, they completely fail the modern test of accessibility and cognitive ease.
Simple typography, often utilizing very clean sans serif fonts or very elegant understated serif fonts with clear letter forms, removes the physical effort of reading.
It emphasizes, as the research explicitly states, clarity and elegance. We have to think about the physical reality of the mourner.
Right, think about an elderly relative.
When an elderly relative is sitting in a pew and they are crying, their vision is literally blurred by tears. The lighting in the church or the hall might be dim.
A simple, clear font ensures they can still read the comforting poem or follow the order of the service without squinting and struggling to decipher a complicated, swirly letter form.
It is about removing friction.
It brings us right back to the paradox we discussed earlier, the tension between contemporary and timeless. Minimalism is the ultimate bridge between those two concepts.
It looks incredibly modern. A clean white page with a beautiful, simple sans serif font and a soft sage green accent line looks like it belongs in the year 2026. It is highly contemporary.
But because it relies on those fundamental mathematical principles of negative space, soft color psychology, and ultimate legibility, it completely avoids trendy, superficial clutter.
It is not going to look foolish or dated in 20 years. It ages flawlessly. It allows the document to achieve true timelessness.
It creates a profound sense of visual serenity. And when we consider that the overarching goal of any memorial service is to help transition the community from the acute, agonizing pain of immediate loss to the gentle, enduring process of long-term remembrance.
A design that inherently projects serenity is a powerful psychological tool. It's not just aesthetics. It is an act of caregiving through design.
An act of caregiving through design. I really love that phrasing.
But I have to challenge the research on something here, because I am looking at the next section of our data, and I am seeing a massive potential contradiction.
Oh, what is it?
If the structure of the design is minimalist, if it is clean, full of vast white space, quiet, and stripped of all clutter, what is actually filling that space? If the design is just a quiet vessel, what is the content?
That's a great question.
The source material tells us exactly what modern families are pouring into these minimalist vessels. Memories.
Yes.
The research states, and I quote the concept here, photo-heavy designs are also increasingly popular, allowing families to showcase multiple memories throughout the program.
This represents another massive, fascinating departure from historical norms. If we think back again to the traditional layout we visualized at the beginning, photography was usually severely restricted.
Often it was entirely absent due to the printing costs we discussed.
But if a photo was included, there was usually only a single formal portrait on the cover.
Right, usually a headshot. And often it was a much older photograph. Maybe it was taken in a professional studio a decade prior, or cropped awkwardly from a family gathering.
And what does a single formal portrait do? It presents a very singular, highly static version of the deceased.
It presents the formal, end-of-life version of them, the solemn, serious persona.
But a human life is not static, and it is rarely entirely solemn.
The push toward photo-heavy designs transforms the fundamental nature of the document. It moves it away from being a mere announcement of death or a schedule of events and turns it into a curated, visual timeline of a vibrant life lived.
It democratizes their history.
Exactly. It's like turning the program into a beautiful miniature editorial magazine of their life.
When the research says it allows families to showcase multiple memories throughout, that word multiple is doing a monumental amount of heavy lifting.
It means we aren't just seeing the 75-year-old grandfather in a suit and tie. We are seeing the 20-year-old soldier in uniform.
We are seeing the 30-year-old father holding his newborn.
We are seeing the 50-year-old guy laughing hysterically on a fishing trip, covered in mud.
Photographs are the ultimate, undeniable storytelling devices. By including multiple photos, families are able to construct a multidimensional, holistic narrative.
They can show the deceased occupying all the different complex roles they played: the professional, the parent, the rebellious teenager, the sibling, the devoted friend, the passionate hobbyist.
They can capture the full spectrum of human moods, the formal elegance of their wedding day, the casual, chaotic joy of a backyard barbecue, the quiet, introverted contemplation of a solo hike in the woods.
This visual storytelling resurrects the three-dimensional human being in the minds of the attendees.
It prevents the flattening of a rich, complex life into a single, two-dimensional, serious headshot. It reminds everyone in the room exactly who they are grieving.
I completely agree with the emotional power of that. But here is my challenge. Here is the contradiction.
Let's hear it.
We just spent 20 minutes dissecting the neurological and psychological benefits of minimalist design. We praised clean layouts and white space.
We talked about John Sweller's cognitive load theory and how clutter overwhelms the grieving brain.
Right. But now, the research is saying that photo-heavy designs are the other massive trend. Doesn't the very word heavy imply clutter?
It seems like it would, yes.
How on earth do you balance a clean, minimalist, serene layout with a document that is stuffed full of 30 different photographs? Doesn't dumping a mountain of photos onto a page immediately ruin the white space and the cognitive ease we just praised?
You can't have both minimalism and maximalism at the same time.
That is a brilliant observation, and it is the exact crux of the modern design challenge. It is the hardest thing for a designer to achieve.
And it is why the research specifies that modern programs must incorporate innovative elements to succeed.
You are absolutely right. If you simply dump 30 photos onto a page in a random disorganized pile, or if you haphazardly slap them together like a messy 1990s scrapbook, it would be chaotic.
It would be visually overwhelming. It would completely violate the principles of minimalism, and it would exhaust the viewer.
However, modern templates utilize highly sophisticated design architecture to reconcile this apparent contradiction.
Okay, explain the architecture. How do you make 30 photos look clean?
By utilizing grid systems.
Grid systems, like how a modern website is built or how your Instagram profile is laid out.
Exactly like that. A grid system is an invisible structure. It is the mathematical skeleton of a page.
It aligns elements, in this case photographs mathematically, creating a profound sense of underlying order and harmony, even when there is a very high volume of visual information.
Think of the Swiss design movement, which revolutionized modern graphic design. They relied heavily on modular grids.
A truly modern, minimalist, photo-heavy template does not just throw pictures on a page.
It might feature a clean, asymmetrical grid of 6 square photos on the left page, perfectly aligned, separated by precise, equal margins of white space, accompanied by simple typography on the right page.
The photos provide the heavy, dense, emotional, and narrative content.
But the invisible grid and the precise application of white space between the images maintain the clean, minimalist aesthetic.
It organizes the emotional weight so it doesn't crush the viewer. The grid acts like a container for the emotion.
That is perfectly stated. Boundaries contain emotion. The invisible lines of the grid provide the structure the brain needs to process the high volume of information without panicking.
It allows the eye to travel logically from one memory to the next, resting briefly in the white space between them.
Its editorial design is like flipping through a high-end magazine.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this precise, delicate balance of clean, grid-based structure and rich, heavy visual storytelling is what cements the document as a true keepsake.
We don't keep itineraries. We don't keep train schedules or grocery lists. We throw them away the second their utilitarian purpose is fulfilled.
But we keep photo albums, we keep beautifully curated magazines, we keep art.
By utilizing grids to transform the funeral program into a highly visual, emotionally dense, yet cleanly organized artifact, families are creating a document that practically demands to be kept.
It becomes a standalone, archival piece of family history.
It becomes a biographical document.
Which is an incredibly beautiful concept. We have talked about how these contemporary digital and print designs are complex, highly personalized, meticulously balanced between minimalism and rich photographic history.
We've talked about neurology and Swiss design grids.
But I want to bring this entirely down to earth for a moment. I want to look at the practical reality.
Because the natural, immediate question for anyone listening to us talk about all this high-level design theory is how on earth does a normal, grieving family, who are not professional graphic designers, have the time, the energy, or the technical skill to create something this sophisticated?
It is the defining practical hurdle of memorialization. It is the bottleneck where good intentions often fail.
Right. Because let's be brutally real about the practical reality of planning a funeral. It almost always happens suddenly.
You have maybe 3 to 7 days between the death and the service.
You are operating on little to no sleep. You are answering 100 phone calls and texts from distressed relatives. You are dealing with the logistics of funeral directors, caterers, florists, and clergy.
You are managing the financial shock of the situation. And underneath all of that, you are in the deepest, most agonizing emotional distress of your life.
You are at your absolute lowest cognitive capacity.
Exactly. I want to paint a picture. Imagine it is 2:00 a.m. on a Wednesday. You have to send the program to the printer by 8 a.m.
You are sitting at your kitchen table crying, trying to build this beautiful, minimalist, grid-based, photo-heavy tribute.
In that environment, you cannot realistically sit down and decide to learn a complex professional software suite like Adobe InDesign from scratch.
You cannot master the mathematics of grid systems, negative space, and typography pairings while trying to write a eulogy for your mother.
If the technology is going to be genuinely useful and not just another source of trauma, it must be entirely frictionless.
Which brings us to the final and arguably most vital insight provided by the research we are analyzing today. The data identifies a specific technological solution to this massive practical hurdle.
The research highlights platforms that are stepping into this gap. Specifically, the source material notes. The funeral program site continues to lead in offering updated designs that reflect these modern trends while remaining easy to use.
The research elaborates that these specialized platforms offer templates that balance modern aesthetics with ease of customization, helping families create beautiful tributes without complexity.
I want to focus intensely on those two specific phrases, remaining easy to use and without complexity.
Because honestly, in the software world, easy to use is a marketing promise that is broken every single day.
We all have software that claims to be intuitive but makes us want to pull our hair out.
But in the context of what we might call grief tech, technology designed specifically for mourning families, ease of use is not just a nice bonus feature to put on the sales page.
It is an absolute non-negotiable moral requirement.
The phrase "without complexity" is the operational key here. What platforms like the funeral program site are doing is essentially acting as a sophisticated digital translator.
They are looking at the high-end, complex design trends we have discussed today, the mathematical grid systems required for photo-heavy layouts, the precise balance of minimalist white space, the curated typography pairings, the formatting required for seamless global digital sharing.
And they're doing all of that heavy lifting behind the scenes. They are pre-coding the good design.
Let's break down exactly how that works for the user at 2:00 a.m. What does a digital shock absorber look like in practice?
Think about the mechanics of building a document. If you try to build a photo grid in a standard generic word processor, what happens?
You drag a JPEG of your grandfather onto the page, and suddenly all the text violently shifts to the next page.
The margins break. The font changes size randomly. You try to resize the photo, and you accidentally stretch his face so it looks distorted.
It is incredibly frustrating. It induces panic.
I've been there. It makes you want to throw the computer out the window.
Right. Now, imagine a specialized platform built without complexity. The grid is hard-coded into the template. The aspect ratios of the photo boxes are locked.
So when that grieving daughter at 2:00 a.m. drags a photo into the box, the software automatically crops it perfectly to fit the grid.
It doesn't stretch the face. It doesn't break the text wrapping.
The margins of white space are protected by the code, so she cannot accidentally clutter the page. The fonts are pre-selected to pair beautifully, so she doesn't have to scroll through 500 options wondering if Helvetica looks too corporate.
So the user doesn't need to understand the golden ratio or Swiss typography. They just need to drag and drop their raw memories into a pre-built, expertly crafted protective structure.
Exactly. There's a profound empathy inherent in good template design. When a system is truly designed to remove complexity, it is deeply respecting the user's fragile psychological state.
Think about the cognitive load we discussed earlier. A complex software interface, one with a steep learning curve, confusing drop-down menus, and constant error messages, adds to the trauma.
It causes intense frustration, which often leads to tears and feelings of profound inadequacy during an already vulnerable time. The user feels like they are failing their loved one because they can't make the margins align.
Conversely, an interface that is intuitive, one that works exactly the way you expect it to on the first try, removes a massive obstacle.
It is an act of caregiving. By removing the technical complexity, these modern templates give families something invaluable, something you cannot put a price on during a week of mourning.
They give them back their time.
They give them back their time, and they give them back their emotional bandwidth.
Instead of fighting with a clunky word processor for 3 hours to make a single photo align correctly, a family member can spend those 3 hours actually looking through the photo boxes with their siblings.
They can spend that time reminiscing, laughing, crying, and healing as they choose the right images. The technology fades entirely into the background.
It silently facilitates the human connection rather than actively hindering it.
It is the ultimate democratization of high-quality design. You no longer need a $1,000 software suite or a 4-year degree in visual arts to honor your loved one beautifully.
The tools now exist to help anyone build that contemporary, timeless, minimalist, photo-rich digital keepsake.
And they exist in a way that is profoundly respectful of the user's grief. It empowers families to take absolute control of the narrative.
When the process is genuinely easy to use, families are not forced to settle for a generic, uninspiring institutional document simply because they ran out of time, energy, or technical skill.
They can achieve that highly personalized tribute that truly, accurately reflects the unique life of the deceased.
Which, as we established at the very beginning of this conversation, is the primary driving force behind this entire evolution.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, and I want to thank you for guiding us through the psychology of this. Let's briefly recap this journey we have been on.
We started by looking at a humble, often overlooked, everyday artifact, the traditional funeral program.
We visualized that static piece of paper, and we've explored how it has evolved, driven by a deep human need for personalized, authentic representation, into a dynamic, digitally accessible, borderless keepsake.
We explored the fascinating design paradox of wanting something both contemporary and timeless.
And we examined how modern minimalist design, with its mathematically clean layouts, neurologically soothing soft colors, and highly accessible simple typography, provides the perfect bridge.
Offering visual breathing room for the overwhelmed, grieving mind.
We also dove deep into the shift toward visual storytelling, analyzing how photo-heavy layouts contained within invisible grid systems allow us to construct a rich, multidimensional narrative of a complex lived life.
Completely replacing the flat, single portrait of the past.
And finally, we grounded all of this high-level philosophical design theory in the very practical reality of grief, acknowledging how modern platforms like the funeral program site act as digital shock absorbers.
They provide empathetic, easy-to-use tools that completely remove the technical complexity from the process, giving families back their time and their sanity.
It is a comprehensive look at how society is adapting its rituals to meet the needs of the modern human heart.
I know this is a topic that we generally, as a society, try to avoid thinking about until we absolutely unavoidably have to.
It is heavy. It can be uncomfortable. But it is also a universal human experience. Every single one of us listening to this will face the loss of someone we deeply love.
And every single one of us will want to honor them in a way that feels true, dignified, and meaningful.
Understanding that these tools, these trends, and these compassionate design philosophies exist in the world means that when the time inevitably comes, you are empowered.
You do not have to settle for the generic. You have the ability to create a beautiful, lasting celebration of life without the added, unnecessary stress of technical frustration.
It is deeply reassuring to know that the landscape of memorialization has actively changed to support the mourner, rather than to constrain them within rigid institutional rules.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought today. Something for you to mull over that builds on everything we've explored in this research, but pushes it just a bit further into the unknown.
We've talked extensively today about how digital formats allow us to share these beautiful programs globally right now. We can email a sophisticated photo-heavy document to a relative across the world in an instant.
But I want you to think about the distant future. Think about 50, 100, or even 200 years from now.
Looking at it from a deep historical perspective.
Exactly. Think about how little we actually know about our ancestors from the 1800s. We might have a single, unsmiling, tintype photograph and a name in a census ledger. That's it.
But with these modern, highly personalized, emotionally rich, visually dense digital tributes living permanently in the cloud, completely undegraded by time, fires, or physical elements.
Well, future generations looking back at their family history have a vastly richer, more vivid, more three-dimensional understanding of who we were than we currently have of our own ancestors.
When a family uses these modern tools to build a beautiful template at 2:00 a.m., are they not just designing a program for a funeral next week? Are they actually actively coding the very archives of human memory for centuries to come?
That is a profoundly beautiful question to consider. The artifacts we create today become the history of tomorrow.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.